Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, where we connect into a matrix of newsmakers to get to the heart of an issue. And watch out, they've got to answer in 25 seconds or less, or else. Let's take a look at that issue right now. As China's Communist Party Congress approaches, and with it an expected change of leadership, China watchers are considering what policies may stand to change. Tensions have risen over trade with the EU, namely over solar panels European producers say Chinese competitors are dumping on the market. China's trade surplus, thanks to its pegged currency, has long been a source of friction. China's disputes with neighbors over islands in the region have flamed up again, this time with Japan, raising concerns. Concerns as well over human rights won't go away. Beijing has maintained a hard line toward its dissidents. Questions have risen over the health of presumed new leader-in-waiting Xi Jinping, seen as a pro-reformer aiming to jumpstart a lagging economy on which the world depends to pull out of an economic slump. What should be Europe's relations with China? How much can China be swayed, if at all, on its currency, trade, and human rights? Or is Europe powerless in the face of an ever-rising China? Now, wired into this edition of The Network is here from Berlin, actually, Helmut Scholz, a European Parliament member of the German leftist party Die Linke. He's on the Parliament's International Trade Committee. He's been critical of China flooding Europe with cheap goods. Quote, "We can't simply say business as usual with China and other emerging economies." From here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Duncan Freeman, research fellow at the Brussels Institute of Contemporary China Studies, or BICCS. He said one positive result from Europe's financial crisis was a shrinking trade deficit with China. And Lixin Yan, EU affairs reporter for international Chinese independent media, including NTD-TV and Epoch Times, both news outlets critical of the government. I must mention that we did invite Chinese diplomats, but they were unavailable to join us on the show. Let's start for a question to all of you, starting with Helmut. There's been intense infighting in the Communist Party over who will be the next party leader. How can this fight affect China's foreign policy? Keep in mind, there are two princes in waiting who are in trouble. There's Bo Xilai, who was ousted as Chongqing Party secretary, and Communist Party Vice President Xi Jinping, which we just said, has health problems. Helmut, how is that affecting, or could that affect, foreign policy?
I would say it can't affect directly the bilateral relationship between the European Union and the People's Republic of China. And therefore, I would say whoever will be in the new leadership, they have to establish a mutual recognized partnership with China, as the EU has to do.
Okay, very good. Duncan, let's go to you. What's your take on this leadership struggle? How could that affect relations with the EU and other countries?
I think that the impact on the EU will be quite marginal. China's policy on the EU has been pretty much settled for many years, and it will continue, whoever is in the leadership positions, to regard the EU as a major partner. So I wouldn't expect really to see any big changes as far as the EU is concerned. China's got plenty of other problems in its own area. It doesn't need more with the EU.
Okay, Lixin, what's your take on this? And, you know, keep in mind, of course, we had not a very good meeting, really, I must admit, between the EU and China recently.
Yes, actually, as you mentioned, there's two people. One is Bo Xilai, another is Xi Jinping. There's two fractions actually inside Chinese leadership. One is a tough line, have some very bloody hand, but another party is pro-reform. Xi Jinping seems from that part, then they defeat, and Bo Xilai was dismissed.
Okay, let's talk about economy. Whoever succeeds, President Hu Jintao, will need to tackle a slowing economy and a widening gap between the rich and the poor. What kind of reform do you see, or should there be? Duncan, let's go to you.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party leadership knows pretty much what it needs to do. There are plans on the table that have been there for quite some time, and it's really a matter of political will. They need to tackle the financial system, they need to look at problems in state-owned enterprises, and they need to look at how they can boost the private economy in China. Those really are some of the main priorities that they will be looking at.
Okay, Helmut, what do you think should be the reform now, considering the economy over there?
I guess that they will continue the reforms as they has encouraged several years ago. The European Union also has to recognize that these reforms of the Chinese are the common interest, and we have to think over how to create a mutual relationship which is taking into consideration the economic, the ecological problems of both sides, of both partners, and in this way to lead to a market economy which is fulfilling the social needs of the citizens.
Okay, so I'm taking kind of it should be a more open economy. Li Xin, what about this trade dispute over solar panels? Could that break out into an all-out trade war between the EU and China?
Actually, as you mentioned, the trade issue, actually China is kind of an export-oriented economy. It's not a market economy. So it means that a lot of things is planned politically. These big companies, so there is a backup of the Chinese government in order to play an important role in the international community. But it's always have very strong political agenda behind it.
Okay. Let's go to Duncan now. Considering the solar panels, also considering the question about currency, that there are some that would like to call China a currency manipulator and actually get tougher on China. What do you think needs to be done to have more of a two-way street on trade with China?
I think for the European Union, the currency issue has never been a priority. A lot of people now would argue with the internationalization of the renminbi that it's pretty much close to an equilibrium level. So it's not the key issue. There are other issues in the Chinese economy that they need to look at, particularly on how the planning system works, overinvestment in industries in China, that will make a big difference.
Okay, probably this is probably the key issue for you, Helmut. How should that be dealt with? How can you make more of a two-way street without causing a trade war?
With the entering of China to the WTO 10 years ago or 12 years ago, almost, we have globalized economy for the first time to touch upon the Chinese citizens, the European citizens. And if we are complaining about competitiveness of the Chinese goods on European markets, we have to realize that we together have to develop new strategies in the economic cooperation. And that must include also investments on both sides. So we should not fear the Chinese, but we should understand that this cooperative approach could serve the interests of the citizens inside the European Union as well as in China.
That sounds rather conciliatory, but what about human rights? Human Rights Watch says China continues to be an authoritarian one-party state that imposes sharp curbs on freedom of expression, association, and religion, and suppresses human rights defenders. To what extent could the EU be exerting more pressure on China? Let's go to Li Xin.
Human rights issues has been always a big point once China is concerned. It has very bad human rights records. The millions of people's rights are deprived, including the biggest spiritual group is Falun Gong group, and also the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and the millions of the human rights defenders. And this is issues that human rights did not stop. And we think that the European Union should really emphasize on that when they talk about relation with China.
Okay, Duncan, does the EU have the power? Can they really exert pressure?
Well, this has traditionally been one of the problems for the EU. It has very few levers that it can really use against China on human rights questions. And it's taken generally a rather cooperative approach, looking to promote human rights, rule of law, and democratization through cooperation rather than forcing China. So, and it's true, I think, that really the human rights future for China depends on what happens in China. And the EU has probably little leverage that it can use to really change things.
Okay, finally to you, you've got the last shot, Helmut, and Germany is a very important trading partner with China. How are you going to try to affect human rights when you're doing so much trade with China?
Yes, of course, we should not neglect the human rights position in China, and we have to increase the cooperation, because only by mutual cooperating we can overcome the issues. And I think that even the Chinese leadership is very often in the political dialogues and the talks with ministers, etc. Only the permanent dialogue can help to overcome it.
Good, good. Helmut, thank you very much. On that note, I'd like to thank all of our guests, Helmut Schultz, Duncan Freeman, and Li Xin Yan. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.